Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Bashir Fancy. I'm the president at BIZTEK, which is Business and Technology Professionals Association of Canada. We're both an education certification organization. We're connected to British Computer Society, ICCP, and several other organizations globally. Our one part is about education certification to make sure the standards are brought up, but we also into the thought leadership area, and we code of ethics and many different things. You can look at our website, BIZTEK, and what we're doing in this series, and you will see us very soon publish almost a year ahead of speakers and some people that you might get a big surprise at, pretty powerful people, global guys, is to bring people who understand different areas of business, technology. Now, today, we're fortunate to have Peter LaMantia. So Peter is the CEO of Authentic Web, and he's got a pretty solid background. He will give you a couple of more details in there. He was the president of A+, A Deluxe, which did similar type of business. In the area he's going to talk about today, so I heard Peter speak. I met him a few years ago, and I can tell you it's a very interesting area. A lot of people don't know much about the DNS area, and it can create some very big challenges by not understanding. So first, Peter, if I missed anything, you can introduce yourself, and then we can get into the discussion. I can ask you some questions and take it there.
Sure. Thanks, Bashir. You know, I really love what you're doing here. You're doing everybody in this community a great favor by demystifying a lot of this stuff that's difficult. Yeah, so, you know, I've been in the domain and web services space since the late 1990s. You mentioned it. I was president of A+. That was an operating entity of Deluxe Corporation. We sold domains and web services to small, medium-sized enterprise, but we also owned a lot of domain names as a corporation, and we always had a difficult time getting control of it, understanding what we have on the DNS and securing it. So in 2013, I founded this business, and what we do is help companies lock down their DNS and put in better control systems to make it easier for them and make them more secure, and also address regulatory compliance, have change management control. So really happy to be here today. I've seen a number of your interviews, and I love the format. It's great.
Fantastic. We moved away from PowerPoint and that type of stuff. No PowerPoints here. We discuss, and it's become very powerful because then the discussion goes where it may, right? Which is very helpful. And some questions that come in can also help. So one of the things, then why don't you start where people may understand? We hear and see compromises every single day, like depending on which area, whether there's ransomware or people getting into the systems. Can you give some examples of compromises you've seen and what, you know, kind of how then you went about it? All right.
Yeah, sure. DNS is sort of, it's a very specialized area. I think it might be helpful as well just to ground people to just on what we're going to talk about today.
Right.
So DNS, you know, everybody knows, I think, that it is the wide open network that enables the internet to work. Everything runs on the DNS. So when you think about DNS security, a lot of people think about the threats coming in from outside, you know, issues like data exfiltration, using DNS queries to transport data out of an organization. So there are a lot of threats coming in. What we're really going to focus today is about how enterprises manage their own infrastructure on the DNS. So it's not the threats coming in, it's just the infrastructure of managing all the different domains you own, all the resource records you have set up in the zone files, and it's not that easy to do that. So in terms of you know, threats that we see in incidents that have happened, you know, there's a few areas. So one is called man in the middle, for example. So this is where, you know, somewhere out on the internet, there's a recursive server that gets compromised. It's called DNS cache poisoning. So the bad guys go into that recursive server and they flood that recursive server with requests, until they get a response, and then they inject false DNS settings in that recursive server. So what then can happen is that someone who hits that recursive server browsing for a website gets redirected to a false website where whatever the perpetrator's plan is, they can, steal credentials, steal logins, etc. So man in the middle is one that needs to be addressed, and that can be addressed with a setting and a tool that's called DNSSEC. Another big one, and I think anybody in IT that's been in it for a long time, is a DNS hijack. So a DNS hijack is where some nefarious actor has been able to get in and make a change on the DNS settings to push traffic to a different area entirely. So the example might be a subdomain, promotion.brand.com. Somehow the bad guy got into that DNS service and changed that DNS setting so it redirects people to a false site as well. So those are a couple. There are other just straight up domain hijacking. The social engineering is one way that they perpetrate this. So there are real examples here. So you could search up Spammy Bear, for example. So this was an attack that was launched against the retail registrar, where companies had a whole bunch of domains, probably mostly for brand defensive domains. And the bad guys were able to get in there and set up the DNS and take over these domains. So look up Spammy Bear. There's another one that happened last year called the Sea Turtle attack. So this is where the bad guys got a hold of the DNS. They were able to change the DNS. And what they did was very clever, in that they changed the DNS settings so that traffic routed through their own servers, but they pushed that traffic on to where it was intended to go. So, network infrastructure guys didn't know. They thought everything was fine, it was moving through, but in the middle of that, the bad guys had servers set up and they were fishing for, credentials, other information. And I think what's important for people to understand is that, the DNS is involved in everything. So it is the open internet, it's wide open, it's designed that way so that we can all use the internet, but that makes it visible everywhere. So they use the DNS to understand where they can perpetrate crimes, and then they go attack on that basis. So it's really important to have your infrastructure locked down, understand what you've got set up, understand what's changed.
So if I heard and understood it correctly, part of the problem is that, and you heard me talk about the skills gaps, but here we're talking about deep DNS expertise. Doesn't look like it exists, A, right? And B, even if it did in some organization, it's narrowed down to maybe an individual or two or whatever. And if that guy moves on or the structure changes, information is gone. Is that true?
Yeah, very much. DNA in most organizations, most organizations will have a few DNS experts. Almost all IT guys understand the basics of the DNS. What's an A record? Right. What's an MX record for mail? What's a text record? Right. But there's very few people that understand the real mechanics and the nitty-gritty of the DNS, and that expertise is lacking. So you may have someone in there that's just an absolute guru in the DNS, has set up different settings to help you stay secure. But if he or she moves on, who's taking over that? And how do those people that come in know what that person's done and what they've got configured? So you lose a lot of institutional knowledge and therefore you get these gaps. And those people that are left to try to figure it out, it can be very difficult because it's very difficult to have full visibility.
So that actually makes it even more interesting, because one of the things I constantly talk about is security. And I know every company canary says, okay, we got this security software, we got this. And I said, it doesn't work like that because it's a combination and a result. See, good security is the result of doing many things right, not one thing here, one thing there.
Yeah.
Right? So here, do you find that the DNS guys, given what you just said, is it your experience that DNS guys are actually pulled into the security side of things in the change management and all that, or are they not?
It depends on the organization. The issues really exist as you know, there's a lot of silos in organizations,
Right.
both in organizational structure.
Right.
So if you've got different business units within a large organization, you may have an IT group that's responsible for one business unit, and they will report up through that structure, then other guys in other areas. So what happens with that is you get all these different systems operating in silos, disconnected, and it's very difficult for that then to get married back to security policies, because you've got all these disconnected systems that don't that are really difficult to understand the full, just the overview of the DNS infrastructure and how it's managed. And it, you know, it's worse than you might think. So you know, it used to be easy in the, you know, in the early 1990s, people had a domain, a couple of domains, large organizations, but today they have hundreds, thousands of domain names, and they may have multiple registrars. And invariably, they could have literally dozens of active DNS services tied to different domains that they own that they've used over the course of that 20 years. So this all gets disconnected, who's got access to those systems, and you know, trying to tie that back to the guys on the security side, it's very difficult because they don't have visibility into what they've got live.
So that actually is something I hadn't thought about, but it just came to me as I'm talking to you about this area. Given that this area not very well understood by people who do the work every day.
Yeah.
But you got plenty of domains, like you said, right? Some may be active, some are not active, but may not have been deactivated and cut off. Have you seen problems where the domains that are not being used, but the DNS may in fact be live in those organizations?
All over the place. All over the place. So these are, you know, campaigns that might have been live 5 years ago, and those campaigns are stopped. So here's a good example.
Right.
A brand in the marketing group, the digital group, they set up a new campaign, promotion.brand.com, on a subdomain. They may spin up an instance at AWS. They run their campaign. The IT guys were requested to set up the DNS to point to that web server. They run the campaign. So the campaign's over. They shut down the Amazon Web Service, but the DNS is still pointing to that IP address. So I read a research paper about this not too long ago, where bad guys can go in there and they can cycle through IP addresses at an Amazon or another cloud host like that until they get the IP they want. Now they have control of promotion.brand.com, and they can represent that brand in different ways. There's lots of these situations where we call these orphaned domains or orphaned DNS settings, that they're still live out on the internet, and they can be taken advantage of by bad actors. So
if you're really running a good disciplined outfit, you want not only an inventory of that, you want a monitoring of timing of when this promotion is over, cut it off. You can even look at packets of traffic, what's going through and things like that, right?
Yeah.
To effectively make sure that this, what you just talked about, does not happen.
That's right. That's right. And, you know, some people sort of look at this and they think about, okay, we've got 4 or 5 flagship domains that represent our digital footprint for the most part. Often those cases are fairly well scrutinized, but they're in a large organization, there can be hundreds of domains that are used for different programs at any one time. And keeping control of that, even if there's sort of adjacent campaign-oriented, maybe country-specific issues, all of these things have to be tied together. And then there's, of course, you know, all the domains that somebody probably illegal in the IP group is registered for brand protection purposes. That's just registered, and it's just not managed. So if you don't manage even a domain that's just sitting there and parked, you need to manage that. You need to set up records, you know, such as SPF records, sending policy framework, or DMARC, to make sure that that domain can't be used for business email compromise campaigns. It's just really difficult with current systems, and having multiple systems to be able to get and keep control of your DNS footprint.
So I have a question, but I will wait for the right place.
Okay.
From then we've talked about some of the risk what are we know the risks and the business impact. If you go a little higher, and we've discussed the fact that perhaps organizations are not aware. I mean, if you were mention the word DNS to the senior executive, he probably never heard it. Yeah, I have no doubt that he's not heard it, and maybe he doesn't need to hear it. So it's not a bad thing. But the question is, what is the risk and business impact to them by this area being so vulnerable?
Right, so it really depends. You know, always this stuff depends on what's being attacked, what's being targeted. You know, you just kind of look at it. If you lose control, if you lost control of your, you know, a DNS setting in one of your flagship domains that could allow someone to impersonate your brand, so there might be a direct impact on that based on, you know, lost revenue, et cetera. But there's also the trust factor. So if you're compromised, or if you're allowing people to, you know, get a control of your situation, you lose that trust of the consumer. You know, that's a long-term impact to your organization. And there are different types of incidents here. I saw there was one a few years ago where Dell Computer had an automated software update on their computers, and they used a domain for it. Now, everything uses a domain to direct traffic. So they had a domain that was embedded in these computers, but many, many years ago. And somehow this domain was allowed to expire and somebody else picked it up. So the incident on that, you can imagine that could have been absolutely catastrophic for Dell Computers. And it's just a very simple thing. The domain didn't renew. Someone else picked it up. Well, why didn't it renew? That's just an oversight of, you know, someone not renewing a domain. Well, that's the point. If you're depending upon people inside your organization, various people, various silos, left hand, right hand starts to happen, you know, that thing should have never been allowed to expire. So, you know, you see things like this all the time. And the other point I'd make here is that, you know, when you look at different compromises and data theft, you know, it's can be somewhat hard to attribute to them. It might have been a patch on a web server that wasn't installed, so there's a vulnerability. But the DNS, you know, is involved in every single one of these attacks. It's used to do research. It's used to find vulnerable servers, open ports, open relays. And, you know, they use the DNS to be able to find it, to do their research, to plant the seed of the attack, to do one, you know, sit on an insecure connection and do some credentials theft initiative. And then from there, they get in a little bit further and in a little bit further. So, you know, not managing it, you're opening yourself up to all sorts of different nefarious people trying to get into your organization to compromise your business that can be quite significant.
I apologize. I'll just the question just you answered was very interesting, because here's what I'm thinking. Isn't there a similar peril here? Just if somebody wasn't kind of getting it fully, which they should get because you explained it very well. But if you were a sysadmin and you were actually now dealing with I guess the guys, CRA guys, not the real guys, are really persistent. I turned the phone off, but I apologize. If you are a sysadmin and you turn off a firewall, some setting, right, to allow traffic back and forth for the purpose of you doing some tests, so you open a port or whatever. And what I've seen too many times is that they forgot and left that port open. It was supposed to be for 5 minutes. They were never supposed to turn it off. Which is similar thing here, right? Identical and some pretty devastating effect. We hear about somebody's website was defaced. Maybe that's possible, but more likely that they took control and diverted you to a website that messed up already, right? So you are seeing not the website of the company, but you know, doing it somewhere else.
Possible, it's right? Human error. It's human oversight. You know, often it's just errors. It's people forgetting, not really caring too much. There's, the internal threat is significant, and it's not necessarily that someone's being malicious internally. It's just that they make mistakes, they forget, they don't really care, or they're just testing something. I've talked to lots of IT administrators that I've talked to about this. They say, oh yeah, we had set up subdomains all the time just to try something, see if it worked, and we wouldn't go back and clean it up. So this is a real, it's this problem that's sort of built up over the years. And, in the old, when the internet first started to really take off in the late 90s and early 2000s, the mantra around DNS was set it and forget it. And that was sort of like, okay, you got it set, everything's working, don't touch it. And that was a mantra in IT, just set it up, it's all going to be good. But it's become more complicated now. And there are a lot more different, the digital surface area has expanded, 1,000-fold. So there are all these different settings that are delivering services, presenting web pages, that, is most of it is underneath the surface. We see the websites, we see the email address that DNS drives, but most of the data is flowing around the DNS below the surface and you don't see it. So the visibility issue is really what drives IT guys crazy. And it's really hard for these guys. They can't get control of it because there is so much going on underneath. And when they try to clean it up, so they start to go through zone reviews and they'll say, okay, should this be set up or not? And they don't know. And there might be a digital guy on the other side of the world who would set something up. So often these DNS zone reviews, they're not complete. Some other priority comes in place and takes over, so they don't ever really do it. So, like you say, it's errors and omissions. It's just mistakes as well that get set up, and then that creates vulnerabilities. And the bad guys are bloody smart. They see these things and right. they find these things and they say, okay, there's a way, there's a vulnerability, there's a path in. Maybe it's not too material, but if I sit on that, maybe I can get some other information to take my attack to the next step. And 5 or 6 steps down the road and 2 or 3 months pass, and then you hear about a big data breach because they found some server that wasn't secure and they compromised it.
Is this the reason what you just explained, the reason why the problem continues to persist in the enterprise because of this, and combine it with the fact that because this screw up may have happened umpteen years ago, it continued, everything looks normal.
Yeah, everything looks normal on the surface. But what's below?
Yeah, I mean, on surface. Would penetration tests would not necessarily pick this up?
No, because penetration tests are just looking at the web servers, right? This is the infrastructure.
Right.
So there's all sorts of internal issues. Whether it's key exchanges, errors and omissions, a lot of manual processes. Having a policy and then being able to enforce a policy. Well, how do you enforce a policy when you've got 25 or 28 active DNS services? You may anchor on 1 or 2, a primary and a secondary for your core and your flagship properties and infrastructure. But you've got all this legacy stuff that's been sitting out there for years. Who's got access to those? What kind of permissions do they have? And where are the passwords? And these are often set up on legacy host DNS that are subject to social engineering, and just you have no idea what people have set up. So you've got to get control of this stuff and be able to see it, be able to control it, and set in some automation tools to be able to visualize this stuff and set stuff up the way according to whatever security policy you might have in place. And that's impossible with multiple systems and multiple silos that are disconnected.
Impossible because there's not enough time, resources, or
there's no time
put into that.
Yeah, IT guys are overloaded, as we know, right?
So there are tools to help deal with this, right?
Yes, there are, but I don't want to make it commercial. But this is what we've done.
Okay, fair enough. No, I think people want. So that's a good point, and I'll come to that then. So here's the other thing. Given that, this is very, very interesting because I think we've talked about a little bit about change management, the visibility to solve this problem, to understand the problem, and you can't solve a problem you don't know that you have to start with, and then understand it. And we know this problem is very low down, although the impact of that is phenomenal to the organization. It's in an area that's got specialty, and it may not be, every time somebody comes, you've seen it, I've seen it, where this is pushed up and you guys go, no, I've got bigger things to just do your work.
That's right.
Whatever, right?
Doesn't make the priority list.
It doesn't make the priority list, yet your web is the biggest, your brand out there, since, if you think about it, since coronavirus or the COVID-19, everything is done, or majority is done through the net, right?
All of it,
so, and the people's reputation are on those things, right?
That's right.
And yet, what you just identifying here is that we're not necessarily paying too much attention here.
Yeah. So you and I had a discussion previously about sort of the shiny object syndrome, right?
That's right. That was my question. Go ahead.
I think that's where you were going.
Yes, absolutely where I was going.
Yeah. So I have a view on that, and there are some great tools out there. And every time you turn around, wow, here's another security tool that I can put into place. So I had a discussion with a fairly senior bank executive in IT security, and he was frustrated because all my guys just continue to want to buy this shiny object. And he went on and he said, they're not fully implemented, right? So we buy this thing, we put it in place, but it's not fully implemented across all different systems. Then another one comes along, and he said, but it's really about, setting the infrastructure. So I sort of think about, the DNS, the shiny object is a shiny object, and the DNS is really the railroad track that everything runs on. Everything's dependent upon the DNS to operate on the open internet, right? So if you're not securing your infrastructure, that railroad track, the cars that are sitting on that railroad track and the shiny balls that are bouncing around on it, you're not going to have success there either. So the organizations need to sort of wake up to this, and they are. We talk to people all the time that are starting to get a view of this, to say, lock down your infrastructure, because most of these things that happen can be addressed by just making sure that your infrastructure is sound on the DNS, and you'll be passed over by the bad guys, because they'll look at it and say, well, these guys are pretty locked down, they're not an easy target, I won't go after them. So number one, lock down the infrastructure, and then everything that you put on top of that, it's very basic in many regards, but that needs to be done for sure.
Right, and make no assumption. Now, it is very interesting, and I'll give you a very simple kind of to add to what you just said, basically. That two examples. One was airport, right, and one is a pretty big retailer, right? And so I was pulled in, and they were looking at PCI compliance, security, and all that. They did all the things right in most part. What they didn't do is, in reality, you have terminals that do go bad. You are at the check-in at the airport, right?
Yeah.
And terminal goes bad. Now the check-in agent can't afford to fool around and have somebody change a bulb or change this, then the other, or a board. So what they do is they take it out and put a new terminal, so the person can get going while they take it back to the workshop and fix that. Guess what? Who was checking that? Nobody. So you were checking your entire environment, but nobody bothered with what was in the store. Not only that, the store was only locked for the fact that somebody doesn't steal it, right? And so you would check it. But people are going in and out of there. Now all you have to do, because the bad guys are on the inside too.
Yeah.
So they're tempered with this thing. So I'm giving you a real example that I actually caught the problem. So that was number one. In the second instance, in the retail, where the point of sale terminals, nobody could figure out what the heck was going on, because the camera, this and the other, some bad things were happening, cards were getting compromised, and I said I wanted to see the cameras and videos and whatever. And what I found in the end, that why is this guy in the video going? It would come with like a rucksack pack every day, right? He was taking one terminal out each day from the store,
Right.
from the storage area, not from here. And he would bring it back next morning. Nobody would miss it. They would tamper with it, same serial number. They would look at it, the serial number the same. Now, what you just identified is pretty identical, because here's the question then. We know on average, bad guys who infiltrate networks, and they stay in about 330 days in your network, approximately, right?
Yeah, they're sitting in there.
They're sitting in there. They don't do bad things because they don't want to get caught yet, right?
Mm.
But what they're doing is they're monitoring exactly your behavior pattern, right? Or what the transactions are, who's communicating with whom, the time of what the packets look like. Now, how long does it take them to come up with and mimic that, and it will bypass all your controls?
Right. They conform to the behavior so it doesn't get flagged by the shiny object service you put in place, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And we are seeing plenty of shiny objects. Last night I was speaking to, I was a keynote speaker at the mining industry of South America. And, some of the questions and stuff we were talking about is exactly that. You're buying tools. Do you understand the whole thing? DNS and the part you were just explaining needs to rise to the level where you not only inventory the thing, but you have a process, a policy to monitor it, right?
Yes.
Because your weakest is one of your weakest links again, right?
It's just like what you said about the guys taking out the terminals. It's the people. It's the people they may be doing things that they think is fine, but they create these exposures. All these manual processes, errors, omissions, lack of oversight, having things in place so that you can see when something changes. We think about security and compliance in sort of three terms. Access. So who has access, whether they've got single sign-on, two-factor, control over shared logins. So the premise is the least privileged access is the way to go. The second one is change management. Who changed what and when did they change it? Can you make a change without permission? If that change is made, do you know that change is made? That's just impossible with multiple systems, multiple silos. And then visibility, just to see what's going on. So you can see that, what's changed in the system. Do you have audit proof? Do you have a daily digest that can show you about, this was changed, well, that doesn't look right. Why did we change that? Who changed it? What was the purpose of that?
Correct.
Right. So if you don't have those things in place, the IT guys are just trying to do their jobs and get stuff done, and they're partners with the digital team, and they're just trying to move the business or the organization forward. But they're making changes all the time that you can't see, and they might make one that compromises your entire organization, and you don't know it. And before you know it, you've got someone sitting on connections doing credential phishing, and before you know it, they're into a VPN and they've got full access to your network.
Absolutely. Now, you just therefore explain why it is difficult for enterprise IT and digital to get control and keep control, because all of this kind of challenges. So then that leads to another question. If you are in an enterprise which has some of this problem, how the heck would they find out?
You need an audit. They need to do a proper audit, right? A zone review. And, like we've just, in that zone review is sort of looking at, what are the HTTP responses? What are the HTTPS responses? What IP addresses are live? So you'll probably find that you have multiple IPs you no longer control. What's happening there? Those records need to be reduced. Do you have open ports? Do you have lane delegations? You need to do that audit to understand what the exposure is. And that's, not easy for a lot of internal folks to do. It's just they don't have time. They don't, they may not have the expertise, or if they do have the expertise, they're probably pretty high valued people that are working on other projects that frankly are a little bit more fun, that they enjoy doing. So it just doesn't get done. And over 25 years, from one domain and a website and email to, thousands of domains, tens of thousands of resource records set up on the DNS. The network is, it's no longer a perimeter, right? There is no perimeter anymore. Everything's happening out in the cloud. We're pushing stuff out. Data's flying around all over the place. How do you know it's secure? How do you know it's going to the right places? Did someone set up an A record the other day and produce a vulnerability? You don't know unless you have visibility of it, unless you have change management so you can audit it and understand what's going on.
So this brings a very interesting question, because you touched audit. Is that you can have automated tools to audit, and it's just like penetration tests that are done.
Yes.
But there's a confusion out there in the world in that I can keep checking once a week or once a month to make sure my problem is that something, you make a minor change. There's Matt Carr of London, Matthew, actually demonstrated with a Rubik's Cube. It's on our
Yes, I saw that. It was fantastic.
It telling you it's changing in real time all the time.
Yeah.
So how the heck do they think? First of all, internal audit. What process are they looking at? They're probably not even looking at this, right?
Yeah.
At least I don't think they're looking at it, number one. Number two, it's got to be continuous audit of systems where it's anything change, bang, boom, boom, take a look at it, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think that is happening, right?
Yeah. At least as a, we sort of think, how to, I say I have 3 questions that I ask people and say, well, I don't know if I have a problem. Well, okay. So I have 3 questions. Do you have a unified tamper-proof system to manage domains in DNS, right? Meaning, can someone change a zone record without permission? And do you know when that changes? And then secondly, I say, can you prove that system enforces your security policies and change management? So for example, what ensures that you do have SPF set up on all your domains or SSLs, and do you have an audit trail? And then third, is that system integrated with your registrar and all your DNS services? And if it's not fully integrated, then you don't have a chance. And that's, again, the issue around, if you have multiple services running all over the place, there's just no way to do that. Most companies have ticketing systems, right? So they will have either built a ticketing system or use something off the shelf, but they're not integrated to production systems. No. They said, okay, Joe IT, please make this change. Joe goes and does it in another system, comes back and says, yes, I've done it. Well, yeah, I trust Joe, but did he do it correctly, right? And was there something else he might have done? So if you're not integrated, there's just no way to know ongoing. So you need that control tool in place to be able to manage the space. And it's getting more complicated all the time.
And what you also mentioned, the scale is so big that even if you went in and you had the time to look at this part, you don't look at the other thing because it's gone like that now.
Right.
So that's a problem. So oversight is needed, a continuous oversight, a continuous validation to make sure. And so it goes back to the fact that I think if you have an inventory, like we talk about with data classification, we don't do a very good job on infrastructure asset management in terms of the inventory of every little thing, what it does, why it does, who is responsible. And then you link it back to this to see, hang on, that change happened here, but there was never an order issued from here to do this.
Right.
So you start to link it back and saying, hang on, either you need 20 people, it's like, writing a check.
Yeah.
One guy writes it, you got big trouble. If 2 guys are writing, and then you got validation, right? Saying, hang on, what check you're paying to what invoice? What was the invoice? Oh, there was invoice for this service. What service? For what? You start to link it back. And when you use the word, as I started thinking about orphan, it appears like that's exactly how this process is managed, right?
Yeah, very, very much. It's just dependent on people to do the right thing in most organizations. And, and some it's better than others, and where, companies have just very, not a lot of domains and have some flagships, it's not so bad. So if if you're a smaller organization, you can do this. But once you get, hundreds and thousands of domains, big companies could have 30,000, 40,000 or more domain names. Many companies have 700 to 2,000 for all sorts of different reasons, product promotions and, defensive registrations, different business units, and acquisitions that they've made that are in completely different systems. And it's just difficult to know what's going on there unless you do that audit and have systems to be able to control that.
Yeah, that could be not just our telecoms, because they've grown. Majority of them have grown by acquisition rather than
absolutely.
Right?
And that's a big cause of multiple systems and silos.
Absolutely. That actually is kind of if somebody's looking at it, you don't have to get ulcer, but sit down and look at how you can fix the problem, and they can probably even talk to you. But the bottom line is, there's a problem. It appears like small, but it's not that small, because the impact of it can be pretty devastating if you're not careful, because your brand is everything.
That trust factor, right?
Right. And the shiny object stuff that we talk about, it seems to be prevailing all over the place in enterprises. People keep buying tools on average. Just on security alone, we found 18, 20 tools, right? That people are bought, and they don't know how to use one of them properly. Never mind 20.
That's right. That's right. And it's, people are struggling. It's such a complex environment, and say, okay, well, here's the thing that might fix us. Here's the thing that might fix us. It's really difficult. And, I just keep coming back to, and many of those are very valuable, but they need to be implemented properly and fully. But if you don't take care of the basic infrastructure that's running all this stuff, you don't have a chance. So that's, and it's very boring. Railroad tracks are boring. They're old, but it runs everything. And, I come back to that phrase that I like to use is, in our day and age, business is digital, and it all runs on the DNS. So if you don't lock that down, you're going to be in trouble for sure.
So that's very, very interesting, because I think you hit the nail on the head. It's not understanding. I keep saying the corporate world is spending a lot of money. A lot of money they're spending on training, on this and the other, buying tools, but they're spending money on who they are, not who they should be. And that is where it starts to get dislocated in a big way.
Yeah.
I've got people who tell me, look at the budget. I'm spending this one. I said, I'm not interested. And they go, why? I said, you show me exactly where. I will show you the problems, and you show me what you spend there. Because they're spending money on what's easy. Even on training. We look at on training, seriously, you go into corporate world, did they turn on and say, your job is this, that, the other, and here are the skills gaps, I want you to learn this? Or they said, pick up the 2 programs you want to go on training, and the guy picks up one in San Francisco, one in some Florida, because it's perfect to go there for a week. But how the heck does that help you? Is it in line with his job? Are you actually improving his? And I got no problem with wherever, send him to Japan. But the point is, what is he going and getting trained? Is it in line with this? And we don't do that because we are ticking boxes even when it comes to performance review. Right? I mean, look at it. We got COVID-19. People had their objectives were set last year. If you're working for a bank, for example, I don't mean to pick on, but just a good example, because their fiscal year is October 31st. Who has gone back to their performance review and saying, by the way, your objectives were this. We know that. We're not going to judge you by that. We're going to judge you by how you cope with the COVID-19 and the fact that everybody's working from home. Which company is going to do that? Show me.
It's a complicated world today, no question.
And you have to be adaptable and flexible, right?
Yeah, you do.
Right, and that's what they're not doing. They need to step back and rethink this and go, hang on, are we judging them on the right performances, right indicators? And I think that's what is going to empower people so they can do things. They will make mistakes for sure, but you can correct them quickly if you've got the oversight in place. So I think this is very, very interesting, and it's not a minor problem. It looks like minor, but it can have some very, very interesting or not so interesting impact.
Well, I think absolutely. I think it is a major problem, because I see what we do audits for companies, and I see what the exposures are. And they surprise the people that we share the audits with in terms of, IP addresses they still have live, or DNS services that are live running, maybe 50 of a couple hundred domain or a couple thousand domains they own. They had no idea these things were live. Well, who has access to that? That's a big question. Maybe no one. Can it be compromised? So it's sort of it's a bit of a, in this complicated world, my view is like take it back to basics and really understand it from the ground up and build from the ground up. And you're exposing yourself because of, if you lose that trust of the consumer because they've been compromised, you're dead in the water. And with domains now, as you're probably aware, we've got all the new top level domains that started coming out in 2014 plus or minus, right? So like .club, .wiki, .energy, etc., and geographics like .london, .paris, .moscow, etc., and also brands. So my view is that just the brand space is to own your own space and to be able to establish policies on that space for every domain and every DNS setting. That can make a big difference in how you get control of this and transition over time to a trusted space that you can control to end, that's authoritative. It's your brand. So there's some real opportunities there for companies to think about as well.
I'm a CEO, I'm a CIO, I'm whatever, and I don't understand maybe all the details. Maybe I don't need to. I got people. What example can you use of an impact we don't need to know the name of the company that has had that this guy should start to worry and saying, I better take this. Better start asking some questions.
You mean relative to a brand top level domain?
Yes.
Yeah. So
the impact that happened because of not having done things.
Yeah. So it's been going on now since about 2014. The first round was in 2012, and from 2014 to today, a number of companies have launched different programs, different use cases, test and learn campaigns. There's about 200 or more companies now that are using their own brand top level domain, and it's all public. One of the ones that was really startling and fantastic last year was KPMG. So KPMG, what are they, $28 billion organization, advisory in every aspect of business and digital and security. They've moved everything over to .kpmg. So if you go to kpmg.com right now, it'll forward you over to home.kpmg. And they've anchored everything in that space. So, and they control all of that. So, they can't, you can't fool the browser at this time. So, if it's KPMG, that's a real site. So they've launched that. They did it earlier this year. They've started to talk about some of the benefits of that. And, as they did their transition, as they worked through their web infrastructure and their digital presence, they found all sorts of places that they can improve that performance. So that's a pretty significant move. We've also seen like BNP Paribas, one of the biggest banks in the world. They were one of the first to move over. Because if you own that right side, you're guaranteeing that this is an authoritative, trusted, authentic space that people can trust and interact with and enter their information. Canon's done some interesting work with global.canon. So there are a number of brands that have started to move on it. It's slow. Enterprises are notoriously slow, and moving your DNS infrastructure from typically your .com over to something different. There's a lot of stuff that's hard coded into network infrastructure and systems that make that difficult to do, but it's clearly happening. We track it pretty closely, and the trends are just steady up, slowly but surely, that you're starting to see these transitions take place where companies move to these authoritative, trusted spaces where everything can be controlled. And right now in a large organization, even some of the big bank, you'll see a domain get registered that might be one of the big bank's domains, but it's over at GoDaddy. And how do I newpromotion.bank.com, anybody can register that. So as a consumer, how do I know it's really that bank? But if you owned your own brand and as a .bank, people will know that. They can trust that. And the communication efficacy of that is going to be better as well. You just think of run.nike. on a billboard. How easy is that? Memorable, easy to share. So, the ability to improve your top line and your contribution margins, there are dozens and dozens of reasons why moving to your own space just makes sense. And rather than today, where companies, they launch a new product, they've got to get the .com, but they've also they need to buy 50 other domain names so that someone else doesn't squat on that. And I was speaking with an IP lawyer in Washington yesterday, and he is saying that his business has gone through the roof recently of people that have been impersonating brands, and he's been filing cease and desists and UDRPs to get these things offline. So that whole cost of having to on brand protection and defending yourself and registering all these defensive domains that you'll never use, but you still need to manage, that can be alleviated with the acquisition and operation of your own authentic brand space.
That's actually a very, very important point you just made.
Yeah,
because
that's long term. Every major brand in the world will own their own space. I'm convinced of it.
Yeah, they have to do that.
It's to think that the world is just going to continue and .com will be king forever. Don't get me wrong, .com is king, but with what are there now? About 700 or 800 generic top-level domains, many more country code top-level domains. Trying to defend yourself in that wide open space now, and it's going to expand even further in the coming years as more new top-level domains come to market.
Right.
So you need to own your own space and drive your brand on that space going forward, where all the security policies can be established and locked down, and no domain ever gets set up without those security settings in place.
There are many times when you go to a particular brand or URL, and if it's not correctly typed in, it gives you an error, so forth. But in this instance, what you're talking about, if it's KPMG as an example, if you screw up, you can default in saying at the end it's .kpmg, even if they're screwed up, go to this place, right?
Is it? Well, sort of. No, what you're talking about now is something that, there's something called NX domains, so non-existent domains. So these are people that have typed something in a domain that doesn't exist. So that domain will fail. It won't resolve, obviously. The same thing would happen for a brand if they didn't have the domain set up, right? Because the wildcards aren't allowed on the DNS. It's an RFC. They're not allowed. However, as a brand, since you own the right of the dot, you can see queries on these NX domains.
Right.
So it actually can present an opportunity for you to find traffic you didn't know existed. So I said, well, we've got, people typing in, whatever it might be, and say, wow, we're getting 1,000 of those queries a day. Well, let's just set that domain up and point that to a product page where we can harness more traffic. So it's it's an interesting piece yet to be proven out because it's so early in the game. Right. But NX domain data is a real thing that can, brands will know, in cooperation with their registry service provider, who's typing in what and whether or not it's worth it to set up those domains, which once you own your brand space, it's massively scalable, infinitely scalable at very low cost. It costs a bit of money to get into it, but once you have it, it's very scalable, and you can reduce costs in other areas.
I thought we were only just going to look at the problem, but you're giving him a very big plus by saying, hey, not only you can deal with this, but there's a plus. And obviously KPMG and the two organizations you have named who've done this, Banque Nationale de Paris, right? BNP. The fact that they were thinking ahead tells me they were on top of this thing long time ago for obviously good reasons. And I think people need to take a step back. In short, what you just said, this is not a Mickey Mouse area. This area should be examined for both marketing benefit and also protecting from the security standpoint, which really means make sure that your skill sets are there. Make sure you're not buying shiny tools. Make sure you have the capacity, which means you would need automated tool, right? Because there's no way physically you can do, especially if you're that big.
You can't do it manually.
No,
It's
you cannot
too
do
big.
it. Yeah,
Right.
you cannot do it. Which
Yeah.
also means, sorry, what I wanted to say, if you're internal audit right now listening to this, and I hope they do, you better start to ask questions saying, you are signing off that everything is okay. Is it really okay?
Yeah.
Have
Well,
you
I'd
looked?
ask those 3 questions.
Right.
Ask those 3 questions. Do we know every change that's been made? Is it fully integrated, right? And is it tamper-proof? So we can see everything that's changed. As long as you know what's changed, you're compliant.
Yeah.
It might have changed in a bad way, but if you know,
Right.
then you're
you can fix
compliant. And if
Right.
you don't know, because you have all these multiple systems that who knows who's typing in and changing something, you're not compliant.
And
You don't have
reconcile.
control of your digital infrastructure.
Absolutely. I think what, Peter, you're saying is you reconcile that back, right?
Yeah.
I issued a check, and the bank took it out. They took out exactly what I said, and it went to the right person. I am not getting calls from that guy to say, hey, you didn't pay my bill. So all the loops come back. Here, it doesn't look like we have that loop till you find out only when the problem happens, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it might be too late by that time.
That's right. And it's the same thing, you know, that people have set up for how they provision a new web server or any old server, that they've got controls and every server has to be, you know, this OS and have these patches in place and security protocols over it. All that has to have change management involved. The same thing goes for the DNS.
Well,
and if you don't, you know, you're exposing yourself. You've got security exposure. You've got compliance gap. And frankly, you're driving your people, you know, people spend tons of time trying to figure out what's wrong and what's set up. And it's just not very efficient inside an organization. And the only way really to fix that is with systems.
Peter, I feel educated this morning.
Good.
I deal with technology, but there are things, and I'm looking at it with a very critical eye. I think you've done a fabulous job. Hopefully, and we will obviously put that video out as a resource available on our website. And if there are questions that come up, we'll put your contact and the whole works there as well. So,
okay, sounds great. Bashir, thanks very much. I always love talking to you. It always goes into places I'm never sure where, and it's quite fun. So thanks very much.
My pleasure, and thank you for doing this because it's fantastic. It was very good in terms of it may be boring for some people who don't understand, but may not be when you look at, hey, it's very important, the impact. So I thank you for doing that, and obviously we will do some more stuff in the future, and I will be in touch. But I truly appreciate your doing it this morning.
My pleasure. Happy to do it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bashir.
My pleasure. All the best.
Same to you and everyone watching.
Thank you.
Okay, bye now.